Grace Torres didn't flinch when the laughter started. The biker at the counter thought he was clever, tapping her wheelchair with his boot, making sure his jokes carried across the room. Grace, a former Marine staff sergeant with 2 tours in Fallujah behind her, didn't react. She kept rolling silverware, each fold precise, her movements reflecting a discipline learned far from this small-town diner. What the others missed, what no one ever really saw, was the fire she'd already survived to reach this corner. In exactly 30 minutes, that same quiet strength would shift the room in ways no one expected. Most mornings, Grace arrived just after the breakfast crowd had thinned, easing her chair up the side ramp and through the quieter entrance. She carried her own coffee creamer, tucked away in a pouch clipped to her wheelchair, a small act of self-sufficiency that fit her habits. The corner booth, always the same one, offered a clear view of the room and a wall at her back, a preference shaped by years of scanning for threats in foreign chow halls. The seat opposite her stayed empty, a silent understanding among the regulars. Grace set to work without fanfare, rolling silverware into napkins, with a precision that came from assembling rifles in the field, not from any restaurant manual. Her hands moved methodically, each motion practiced and deliberate, every fork and knife aligned just so. She never rushed, never let her attention drift, even when the diner grew noisy or the pace of the lunch rush picked up. The routine was its own kind of armor, steady, unbroken, and unmistakably military in its discipline. The staff respected her rhythm. A waitress would slide a cup of coffee across the table at the usual time, never asking if she wanted anything different. Grace rarely touched it. She focused on the work, letting the repetitions settle her nerves. The room's background hum faded as she counted out napkins, folded each one, and stacked the finished bundles in neat rows. The scars on her hands, visible when she gripped the utensils, were reminders of other routine zones that had kept her and her unit alive in places where mistakes cost more than a dropped fork. Sometimes, new faces in the diner would glance her way, curiosity flickering over the visible absence of her left leg. Grace met their eyes briefly, then returned to her task. She didn't invite conversation, nor did she shrink from attention. Her presence was quiet, but it filled the space with a kind of order that even the regulars grew to expect. On this particular day, as the clock edged closer to lunch, the familiar rhythm was interrupted. The laughter from the front of the diner grew louder, voices carrying over the clatter of plates and the low hum of the radio. Grace didn't pause. Her movements stayed measured, her focus unbroken, even as the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The regulars sensed the change, glancing toward the source of the noise, but no one intervened. Grace continued her routine, each fold and roll a quiet assertion of control in a space that sometimes threatened to tip out of balance. The room held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Dignity in a place like this wasn't a given. It was something calculated, protected, and in days like this, tested. The insult came sharp across the diner. "Combat Barbie." The words were loud enough to draw stares, meant to sting, but Grace paused only briefly. Her hands stilled on the napkin, face unreadable as she gathered herself. Years of discipline had taught her when to hold ground and when to let words slide off her armor. The insult didn't land so much as announce itself, just another test of what she would tolerate. Blade moved next. His hand clamped down on her wheelchair's push handle, giving it a hard shove. The chair jolted backward, wheels scraping against the floor, and Grace's body went with it, her balance thrown. She braced, but the force sent her down. Her coffee cup tipped, spilling across the tile, and her wallet slid from her lap. Contents scattered, and a single photograph landed face up. 7 Marines, desert uniforms, dust and sunburned smiles. Grace in the center, before the blast that changed everything. The diner went silent. No one moved, not the waitress behind the counter, not the regulars with their half-finished plates. The only sound was the last of the coffee dripping off the edge of the table. Grace didn't look for help. She pushed herself upright, her movements practiced and unhurried, retrieving the photo with one hand and tucking it away. A smear of coffee stained the edge, but she brushed it off, her focus steady. The chair wobbled as she righted it, but she didn't let the struggle show on her face. No one came to her side. The trucker at the counter kept his eyes on his plate. The college student fiddled with his phone, pretending not to see. Grace had learned long ago that help, when offered, often carried pity with it. She didn't want pity. She wanted space to gather herself, to put her world back in order on her own terms. 18 months in rehab had drilled that into her: how to fall, how to rise, how to keep moving. The bikers turned their attention elsewhere, voices rising again as if nothing had happened. Grace gathered the scattered contents of her wallet, placed them back in order, and set her coffee cup upright. She rolled her shoulders back, adjusted her chair, and returned to folding silverware. Her hands moved with the same precision as before, each napkin a quiet act of defiance. Across the room, small reactions played out in the corners of the diner, eyes darting, hands pausing mid-motion. The incident lingered, unspoken but heavy, as those who witnessed it tried to decide what, if anything, they should do next. At a table near the window, a young boy named Tommy stared, wide-eyed, at Grace as her wheelchair jerked back. His chocolate milk sloshed onto the formica, but he didn't seem to notice. His father, a broad-shouldered man with a faded Marine Corps tattoo peeking from under his sleeve, watched the scene unfold with a hard, unblinking stare. He didn't reach for the napkin or for his son's hand. His attention stayed fixed on Grace, his jaw set. He recognized the way she moved, the way she gathered herself on the floor and refused help. He'd seen that same look in barracks and on dusty parade grounds. The emblem on Tommy's shirt, worn and stretched, marked their family's own connection to service. The father pulled his phone from his pocket and, after a moment's hesitation, dialed a number he hadn't called in years. His old sergeant at the barracks, the one who always knew how to handle trouble. Across the aisle, another custom-era man in his 70s, his hair clipped short. A small silver pin on his jacket lapel rose from his booth. He moved slowly, favoring his right knee, but he stood tall as he watched the bikers at the counter. His eyes lingered on Grace, then flicked to the spilled coffee, the scattered silverware, the wallet photo she tucked away. He didn't say a word, but the way he straightened his back and squared his shoulders sent a silent message. He had the look of someone who'd worn a uniform long before the room knew his name. A few feet away, a woman at a corner table slipped a handful of change onto her check before leaving, her movements quiet and deliberate. She paused, watching Grace for a moment, then stepped out into the sunlight without a word. The coins glinted on the tabletop, a small gesture that went unnoticed by most but not by the staff. Tommy, still rooted in his seat, fished a popsicle stick medal from his pocket, the word "hero" written in shaky glitter. He turned it over in his hands, unsure if he should stand or stay put. His father's hand rested gently on his shoulder now, not holding him back, but steadying him. The atmosphere in the diner shifted, the usual rhythm disrupted. Chairs scraped the floor as people adjusted their seats, voices dropped to low murmurs. The regulars watched Grace as she righted herself and returned to her routine, their attention lingering in a way it hadn't before. The man with the Marine tattoo finished his call, his eyes never leaving the bikers. At the counter, the staff exchanged glances, their movements a little sharper, a little more deliberate. As Grace gathered her scattered silverware and wiped the coffee from her jeans, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. A change moved quietly through the diner, subtle at first. Voices dropped, conversations thinning until only the scrape of forks and the hum of the overhead lights remained. Grace returned to her station, her jeans still damp, but her focus sharpened. She resumed her work, hands steady as she rolled more silverware, each movement deliberate. The napkins folded a little tighter now, the rhythm of her task undisturbed by the earlier commotion. Within minutes, the usual routine unraveled. The manager stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron as he surveyed the room. His posture straightened, and he positioned himself near Grace, a silent presence between her and the bikers. He didn't say anything, but the shift in his stance was clear. The staff behind him moved with new purpose, eyes flicking between the tables and the front door. A few customers, those with military pins on their jackets, or the faded lines of old tattoos, rose from their seats. Some stood near Grace's corner. Others positioned themselves along the walls or by the exits. They didn't approach the bikers, nor did they speak. Their presence alone was enough to draw a line through the space, a quiet show of solidarity that needed no words. The bikers, who had filled the room with noise just minutes before, now found themselves surrounded by a silence they couldn't break. The regulars, who usually kept to themselves, shifted closer together. The elderly couple who had finished their meal lingered at the counter, ordering another round of coffee and keeping watch. The man with a Marine Corps tattoo on his arm leaned forward, his gaze locked on the group at the front. Even the staff, who had always moved briskly through the lunch rush, now seemed to slow down, their attention fixed on the unfolding scene. No one confronted the bikers directly. Instead, their isolation grew more obvious with each passing moment. Where laughter and bravado had once filled the air, now there was only the steady clink of silverware and the quiet movement of people drawing together. The bikers glanced around, their confidence fading as they realized the room had shifted against them. Grace noticed the change but didn't acknowledge it. She continued her work, aligning the last bundle of silverware with the others. Her presence anchored the space, and the silent support from those around her built a new kind of order. The atmosphere was different now, still tense, but steadier, as if the room itself had decided what it would allow. As the bikers shifted in their seats, uncertain, a quiet anticipation settled over the diner. The next move belonged to someone else. Tommy slid off his stool, metal clinking in his pocket as he walked toward Grace. His father let him go, eyes steady as he watched the boy cross the floor. Tommy's hands shook as he set a carefully folded origami eagle on the table in front of Grace, the wings pressed flat from being held too tight. He hesitated, then brought his hand up in a salute, awkward, elbow too high but determined. The diner fell silent, every fork and coffee cup paused midair. Grace looked at the boy for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she returned the salute, crisp and exact, the kind that comes from years of habit. Tommy's eyes went wide. He held the pose a second longer, then dropped his hand, cheeks flushed. Grace gave a small nod, and the corners of her mouth tightened, not quite a smile but something close. Around them, the regulars and staff watched without a word. The tension in the room shifted, the earlier hostility replaced by something quieter, respect, maybe, or relief. The bikers, sensing the change, gathered their jackets and moved for the door. Their bravado faded in the hush, boots scuffing against the floor as they passed the tables lined with silent witnesses. No one blocked their way, but no one looked away either. As the door swung shut behind them, the atmosphere in the diner changed. People let out slow breaths. Chairs scraped as customers settled back in, some returning to half-eaten meals, others simply watching Grace as she adjusted the origami eagle on her table. The staff resumed their routines, but the way they moved had shifted, more deliberate, more aware. Grace stayed at her table, hands resting on the napkin beside the eagle. She didn't look up as the manager checked on her, just nodded once in acknowledgement. The boy returned to his father's side, metal clutched tight in his fist. Outside, the bikers lingered for a moment before moving on down the street. Inside, the diner's energy settled into a new rhythm. The regulars glanced at Grace, some with a nod, others with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. The moment hung in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone present. In the stillness that followed, something had shifted. The room felt different now, steady, watchful, changed in a way that would last long after the lunch rush ended. After the bikers left, the diner settled into a new routine. The changes were small at first. A photo of Grace's old unit propped on the pass-through window, a few regulars pausing longer by her booth before heading out. Someone polished the glass and wiped away the streaks that had always been there, leaving the window clear except for the picture. Above her usual booth, the reserved sign disappeared overnight. In its place, a brass plaque caught the morning light. The engraving was simple: "For those who stood so we could sit." It was the manager's idea, installed before most of the town woke up. Grace saw it on her way in one morning and didn't say much, just nodded once and went back to folding napkins. Within days, Marines began showing up on Thursdays. Some wore dress blues. Others came in weather jackets with unit patches sewn on the sleeves. They didn't make a show of it. They slipped into the booths near Grace's corner, ordered burnt coffee, and watched as she taught the new hires how to stack forks and knives with tight, squared corners. The routine grew familiar. A teenage waitress, whose brother was away at basic, picked up the details quickly. The Marines at the counter never commented when Grace quietly corrected a crooked fold or a misaligned fork. The diner's name changed, too. The old sign came down, replaced by a new one that read Homefront Cafe. The staff didn't talk about it much, but the regulars noticed. Customers started leaving small tokens-folded flags, challenge coins, even a dog tag with the name worn smooth on the ledge beneath the plaque. Grace moved most of them to the counter each night, but she left the dog tag where it was. The table where the bikers used to sit stayed empty for a while, but eventually it became something else. A small brass plate underneath listed the names of local Gold Star families. Tips left at that table went to a veterans charity, collected and mailed out every Friday. Grace handled it herself, just as she'd always done with her checks. Word spread beyond town limits. Veterans passing through stopped in for a meal, sometimes leaving a patch or a folded note for Grace. Scout troops started coming by, sitting quietly at nearby tables, watching how she worked. The jukebox broke that winter, and no one rushed to fix it. People said the last song that played was worth keeping. Grace's habits didn't change much. She still arrived early, still rolled silverware with the same careful hands. The difference now was the quiet company-veterans, families, and strangers who recognized something in the way she moved. Some left notes, sometimes just a single word folded under her cup. Grace read each one and tucked them away, the photo in her wallet slowly joined by new faces and names. Over time, the cafe became more than a place to eat. It turned into a waypoint for people who understood what it meant to hold your ground without saying a word. And as the days passed, the respect that filled the room didn't need to be spoken out loud. It was there in the way people watched out for each other, in the steady rhythm of Grace's hands, and in the quiet that followed when the world outside tried to push back. Every morning, respect now greets Grace at her regular booth, the brass plaque above it a quiet reminder of what she's carried and what she's built. The diner's name and culture have changed, shaped by her steady presence and the way she never asked for recognition. Marines fill the booth across from her, and the space itself has become a gathering point for those who understand what real strength looks like. Grace's dignity set the Tonino speeches. No demands, just the simple act of showing up and doing the work. Her example turned a local cafe into a place where service is honored, and where community means watching each other's backs. If you believe respect is earned in moments like these, comment "respect" below or share a story about a veteran who made a difference in your life.